The radio crackled with static, but the voice that followed was clear. "This is Forward Outpost Echo. Survivors detected. Repeat, this is a safe zone. Limited capacity, but we have food, shelter, and security. Coordinates transmitting now. Move quickly. We can't hold forever." The message ended, leaving only silence. Jonah clenched his jaw as he stared at the handheld radio. In a world where most signals had gone dark, the transmission was a lifeline, a fragile thread of hope dangling over an abyss of rotting horrors. He looked up at the others gathered around the crackling fire, their weary faces illuminated by the dying embers. "Sounds like a trap," grunted Malik, tightening the straps of his rifle sling. "We've been down this road before. Too many times." "Maybe," Jonah admitted. "But if it's real, we can't ignore it." Lena, the group's medic, ran a hand through her filthy blonde hair. "We're running out of options. We don't have enough supplies to last another week, let alone a month. If there's even a chance." "Then we take it," interrupted Cam, their youngest, barely 19 and already hardened by the apocalypse. His hand hovered near the pistol strapped to his thigh. "Better to die trying than starve out here." No one argued. The decision had already been made. The journey to Echo. They moved at dawn, following the transmitted coordinates deep into the mountains. The roads were long dead, cracked and broken by time, littered with rusted wrecks and skeletal remains of those who had tried to flee the outbreak. The infected were sparse in the wilderness, but the silence was worse than the screams of the undead. By the second day, the outpost came into view, a towering concrete fortress, its walls scarred by old battles, reinforced with makeshift barricades. The gates stood open, an eerie invitation. Jonah raised his binoculars, scanning the perimeter. No movement. No guards. "This doesn't feel right," Malik muttered. "It's too quiet," Lena agreed. Jonah took a deep breath. "We came this far. Let's move." A fortress of flesh and bone. Inside, the air was thick with decay. The ground was littered with discarded gear, helmets, empty magazines, shredded uniforms. A blood-stained mural of horror. Lena crouched near a collapsed barricade, her fingers grazing the dried remains of a soldier's uniform. No bodies. Just scraps. The observation tower loomed above them, and from its peak, the radio antenna still blinked a dull red. Someone had sent that signal. Someone had been here, recently. Cam nudged a rifle on the ground with his boot. They didn't just die. They vanished. Jonah's stomach tightened. Not vanished. Taken. A slow, distant sound echoed through the halls. A wet, dragging noise. Then, the walls moved. It was subtle at first, a ripple, like shifting shadows, but then the truth revealed itself. The walls weren't walls at all. They were bodies. Twisted, fused together, a grotesque monument of flesh. Jonah's breath caught in his throat. The fortress wasn't just abandoned. It had been consumed. Then the whisper came. Not from the radio. Not from any of them. "More have come." Malik spun, gun raised. "Who the hell said that?" Silence. Jonah exhaled slowly. His fingers tightened around his weapon. They were not alone. Something was waiting for them. Watching. And it had just welcomed them home. The silence was thick, suffocating. The air inside the outpost carried the scent of rot, but beneath it was something worse, something alive. Jonah motioned for the others to stay low as they moved deeper inside. The flickering emergency lights painted the corridors in sickly shades of red and orange, casting shifting shadows that played tricks on their eyes. "This place is wrong," Lena whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Cam swallowed hard. "What the hell happened here?" Malik moved ahead, rifle raised, his fingers tight on the trigger. "Stay sharp. If anything moves, we put it down." But that was the problem. Nothing moved. The walls, those grotesque formations of twisted bodies, remained still, yet their presence gnawed at Jonah's mind. He had seen horrors in the wasteland, but this was different. Then the whisper came again. More have come. It wasn't a voice in the air. It was inside their heads. Jonah clenched his jaw. His instincts screamed at him to run, but he had to keep control. We need to find that radio room. If someone sent that signal, they might still be alive. Lena nodded, but her hand hovered near the pistol at her hip. They pressed on, passing through a series of hallways that led deeper into the outpost. Bloodstains streaked the walls, long dried into patterns that resembled claw marks. Yet still, there were no bodies. Then, they heard it. A slow, rhythmic clicking sound. Malik signaled for them to stop, his gaze snapping toward an open doorway ahead. The room beyond was dark, but the clicking persisted, sharp, deliberate, watching. Cam shifted uneasily. What is that? Jonah's gut twisted. He had a feeling they didn't want to find out. We keep moving, he whispered. They edged past the doorway, holding their breath. But just as Jonah stepped forward, the clicking stopped. A long, low exhale filled the darkness. Jonah turned just in time to see something shift within the shadows. A figure, twisted and elongated, its body half fused with the flesh-covered wall, opened its mouth. And then it screamed. The hive awakens. The sound was unlike anything they had ever heard, not just a scream, but a signal. A wailing alarm that reverberated through the very walls. Then the fortress moved. The once motionless bodies began to shift, their fused forms unraveling with sickening cracks and wet, tearing sounds. Dozens of them. Hundreds. They peeled away from the walls, their empty eyes locked onto the intruders. Malik fired first. The muzzle flash lit the hallway, and the nearest creature's skull erupted in a spray of black and gore. Jonah grabbed Lena's arm. Move! The group sprinted through the twisting corridors, the grotesque figures surging behind them, their movements eerily synchronized, as if guided by a single mind. They turned a corner and nearly slammed into a metal door labeled Command Center. Inside. Jonah barked. Cam yanked the handle, and the door groaned open just as Malik emptied another magazine into the horde. They tumbled inside, and Jonah threw his weight against the door, slamming it shut just as the first of the creatures reached them. The pounding began immediately. Fists, if they could still be called that, slammed against the metal, a relentless, unnatural rhythm. Lena gasped for breath, pressing a hand to her chest. What the hell were those? Jonah turned, scanning the room. The radio equipment sat in the corner, still powered, still transmitting the same pre-recorded distress message on repeat. But the rest of the room was not empty. A man sat slumped against the far wall, his uniform tattered, his body covered in deep, festering wounds. His head lifted slightly at their arrival, blood trickling from his cracked lips. You shouldn't have come, he rasped. Jonah stepped forward cautiously. You sent the signal? The man gave a slow, weak nod. His sunken eyes darted toward the door. The pounding had stopped. The silence was worse. The soldier wheezed. They see through each other, feel what the others feel. You don't understand. This outpost, it isn't a fortress. His breathing was ragged now, desperate. It's a nest. Lena knelt beside him, checking his pulse. Her face paled. Jonah, he's infected. The soldier coughed, his body convulsing. Not infected, his lips curled into something between a grimace and a smile. Worse. Then, his body went rigid. His back arched, and his eyes turned black. Malik cursed and raised his rifle. But the soldier wasn't dying. His skin rippled, pulsed, as though something beneath it was trying to crawl free. His head snapped toward Jonah, and when he spoke, his voice was not his own. More have come. Jonah felt ice in his veins. That voice. It wasn't just inside the soldier's head. It was inside all of them. Then, the lights flickered. And the soldier lunged. The soldier lunged, his body moving with unnatural speed, mouth stretched open wider than any human jaw should allow. Jonah barely had time to react before Malik's rifle cracked, a single shot slamming into the man's chest. The force sent him sprawling backward, his body convulsing on the floor. But he didn't die. His body twisted, bones shifting beneath his flesh as something inside of him tried to break free. His veins turned black, spreading like spiderwebs beneath his skin. "Burn him!" Lena screamed, scrambling backward. Cam was already moving. He grabbed a flare from his pack, struck it, and threw it. The soldier let out an inhuman shriek as the fire caught, his flesh boiling as the infection writhed beneath the flames. His final scream was not his own, it was a voice from the walls, from the nest, from the hive. Then, silence. Jonah's breathing was ragged as he turned to the others. "We need to move. Now." But before anyone could respond, a voice echoed through the room. Not from the radio. Not from the walls. From everywhere. "You should not have come." The air turned cold. The static from the radio cut out, replaced by slow, deliberate breathing. Then, the voice spoke again, calm, measured, and impossibly aware. "We have watched you." Lena gripped her gun tighter. "Who the hell is that?" Jonah's mind raced. The soldier's words came back to him, they see through each other, feel what the others feel. This wasn't just a horde. This was something worse. Something intelligent. A sound came from the door. A slow, rhythmic knocking. Jonah's blood ran cold. Then the metal screeched, bending outward. Something on the other side was forcing it open. Malik raised his rifle. "Move!" They sprinted for the back exit, shoving through a maintenance corridor. The metal walls around them pulsed, as if breathing. The whispering returned, dozens of voices layered into one. Jonah's heart pounded. This wasn't just an infection. It was a mind. A singular, collective consciousness. And then they saw him. The flesh-bound commander. They burst into a vast, open chamber, a war room, its walls once lined with screens and maps. But now, it was a cathedral of flesh. The walls bled. Organic matter pulsed beneath metal plating, bones woven into the structure like roots. And at the center, upon a throne of twisted bodies, sat him. The flesh-bound commander. His body was still vaguely human, broad-shouldered, wrapped in the tattered remains of a military officer's uniform. But his skin was stitched with living flesh, his arms elongated, his fingers sharpened into something inhuman. Veins of blackened infection crawled across his exposed torso, pulsing in rhythm with the fortress itself. But his eyes were still human. Cold. Calculating. Alive. Jonah froze as the commander stood. His movements were smooth, deliberate, like a predator assessing its prey. "You struggle," he said, his voice a mix of many. "You resist. But you do not understand." Cam raised his pistol. "Stay back." The commander tilted his head, almost amused. "Do you know what this place was?" He gestured around the grotesque war room. "A last stand. A desperate attempt to control the infection. The military sought to turn the tide." He smiled, a cold, wrong expression. "They failed." Jonah's fingers tightened on his weapon. "And what are you?" The commander took a step forward. "I am the result. The will of the hive, made flesh. The first of many." The walls shuddered. The voices whispered in unison. "Join us." Malik spat. "Like hell." The commander sighed. "You fight for a world that no longer exists. You cling to the illusion of survival. But we have evolved." Lena's hands trembled, her breath ragged. "You're a monster." The commander's smile widened. "No. I am the future." Then, he moved. The fight for escape. He was fast. One moment, he stood before them. The next, he lunged, his arms stretching unnaturally, fingers morphing into elongated claws. Malik fired, 3 rounds center mass. The bullets hit, but the commander barely reacted, his flesh rippling as if absorbing the impact. Cam threw another flare, but this time, the commander dodged, moving like a shadow. "Run!" Jonah roared. They bolted for the exit, but the fortress was alive. The walls shifted, sealing off passages, forcing them toward the corridors leading deeper inside. Jonah knew what was happening. They weren't being chased. They were being herded. The whispers grew louder. The hive was speaking. Laughing. Then, ahead of them, a way out. A service hatch, half collapsed but open. A glimmer of freedom. "Go!" Jonah shouted. Lena scrambled through first, followed by Cam. Malik was right behind them when the commander struck. His claws lashed out, catching Malik's leg. The force ripped him backward, slamming him into the floor. He cried out in pain as the infection crawled up his skin like living veins. "Jonah!" Malik screamed, his eyes wide with terror. Jonah didn't think. He grabbed a combat knife from his belt. And sliced. Malik howled as Jonah severed the infected flesh, cutting deep, carving away the tainted muscle. Lena and Cam pulled Malik through as the commander let out an inhuman roar. Jonah dove through the hatch just as the walls collapsed inward, sealing the war room behind them. They tumbled into the cold, open night. The fortress loomed behind them, still watching. The whispers did not fade. The commander's voice echoed in Jonah's mind. "Run while you can. You will return. They always do." Jonah turned toward the others. They had escaped. But deep down, he knew. This wasn't over. The cold night air hit them like a slap, but it was nothing compared to the horror they had just left behind. The fortress still loomed, its grotesque walls of twisted flesh writhing under the dim glow of the moon. The whispers still echoed in their minds, soft, lingering, watching. But they had no time to process it. Malik was bleeding out. Jonah tore his jacket off and wrapped it tightly around the stump of Malik's leg, where he had sliced away the infected flesh. Malik gritted his teeth, his face drenched in sweat, but he was still alive. "We need to move," Jonah muttered, scanning the dark wasteland around them. "That thing won't let us go that easily." Lena pressed a hand to Malik's shoulder. "Can you walk?" Malik let out a bitter laugh. "I can hop like a damn bunny." "Let's go." Kim helped him up, and the group staggered away from the outpost, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Every step felt like the weight of the hive was pressing down on them, watching, waiting. They had escaped. But deep down, Jonah knew they weren't free. The hollow town. After an hour of trekking across the barren wasteland, they spotted a town. Or what was left of one. The buildings were old, long abandoned. Most were crumbling, their walls overtaken by vines and decay. But it was quiet. No signs of movement. No whispers. Jonah exhaled, tension easing from his shoulders. "We rest here." They found shelter in an old convenience store. Dust-covered shelves still held cans of expired food, and the stench of mildew clung to the air. It wasn't much, but it was safe. For now. Lena helped Malik settle against the counter, his breathing shallow. His skin was clammy, and his wound was still bleeding. "We need antibiotics," Lena said. "If we don't stop the infection, he won't make it." Jonah nodded. "Cam, help me search the buildings." Cam hesitated. "You sure we should split up?" Jonah's expression hardened. "We don't have a choice." The voices returned. Jonah and Cam searched the town in tense silence, weapons raised. The streets were empty, the only sound the distant howl of the wind. They found an old clinic. The door was already broken open, and inside, dust-covered medical supplies lined the shelves. Jonah grabbed a half-used bottle of antibiotics and some bandages, stuffing them into his pack. Then he heard it. A whisper. Not from the hive. A human whisper. He turned sharply. At the end of the hallway, a figure stood just out of sight. "Who's there?" Jonah called. No answer. Jonah exchanged a glance with Cam before raising his rifle. They moved forward cautiously, boots crunching on broken glass. They reached the end of the hallway and turned the corner. The wall was covered in writing. Scrawled in dried blood. It sees. It knows. It speaks through the walls. There is no escape. Jonah's pulse quickened. This was wrong. Then Cam pointed. There. A body slumped against the wall. A man, dressed in ragged clothes, his face twisted in agony. His hands were missing, replaced with fused flesh, as if he had been absorbed by the wall itself. And his eyes. They were still open. Still watching. Jonah took a step back. We need to go. Now. Then the whispers returned. Soft. Familiar. You will return. They always do. The lights flickered. The walls shifted. Jonah grabbed Cam and ran. Nowhere left to hide. By the time they returned to the convenience store, Lena was pressing a blood-soaked rag to Malik's forehead. His breathing was shallow, his skin deathly pale. Jonah tossed the antibiotics to her. Give him this. We have to keep moving. Lena's eyes were full of desperation. He can't move, Jonah. Not in this condition. Cam swallowed. Then what do we do? Jonah ran a hand through his hair. Think. Think. But then. Thump. His blood ran cold. The sound came from the roof. Thump. Lena looked up, her breath catching. They found us. Jonah grabbed his rifle and motioned for everyone to stay quiet. The thumping continued, slow and deliberate, like something pacing. Then. A long, scraping sound. Claws dragging across metal. Jonah's stomach twisted. It wasn't just a horde. It was him. The flesh-bound commander. The whispers surged, louder now, bleeding into their skulls. You cannot run. This world is ours. Then. Crash. The roof caved in. A blackened mass of flesh and tendrils dropped into the store, hissing, its many eyes locked onto them. Jonah didn't hesitate. Run. Lena yanked Malik up, and Cam grabbed their supplies. They burst through the back door, sprinting into the night as the whispers screamed inside their heads. Jonah turned for a single moment. And saw the commander standing in the ruins of the store. Unmoving. Watching. Smiling. And then he spoke. There is nowhere left to run. Jonah's breath caught in his throat. Because this time, the voice wasn't just in his head. It was coming from Malik. Jonah's breath turned shallow. Did he just hear that right? The commander's voice had come from Malik. Lena tightened her grip on Malik, panic flashing across her face. Cam's fingers hovered over his pistol, his expression torn between fear and hesitation. No, Lena whispered. No, it can't be. Malik groaned, his body trembling against her. His skin was slick with sweat, and his veins, they were turning black. Jonah felt the world closing in. Had the infection already taken root? But Malik was still himself. His eyes, glazed with fever, were filled with confusion, pain. He looked at them with desperate clarity. Don't, he rasped. Don't look at me like that. I'm not. His own voice cut out. His lips moved, but what came out next wasn't his. We are one. He is part of us now. Jonah felt the blood drain from his face. Lena took a step back, her grip on Malik faltering. No, she murmured, shaking her head violently. No, we cut it out. We stopped it. Malik gritted his teeth, trying to fight whatever was crawling inside him. His fingers dug into the dirt, his breath ragged. I won't let it take me, he hissed. Jonah knelt in front of him, gripping his shoulders. We're getting you out of this, you hear me? But the whispers did not stop. They swirled through the air, an unseen presence pressing against them. The commander was still inside him. And then, the sky began to shift. A town that bleeds. The stars above seemed to pulse, flickering unnaturally. The buildings around them, silent and decayed, began to change. Dark veins spread across the walls, writhing like living things. The structures themselves exhaled, a slow, guttural groan escaping from the stone. Jonah's hands curled into fists. The town wasn't abandoned. It was alive. "We have to move," Cam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Now." Jonah nodded. "We'll find another shelter. Someplace safer." But even as he said it, he knew there was no safe place left. Still, they had to try. Malik's struggle. They made their way through the warped streets, moving as fast as Malik's deteriorating condition would allow. His breathing was ragged, his skin ashen, but he fought to stay conscious. And then, the black veins in his arm pulsed. Malik staggered, his body convulsing. He grabbed Jonah's jacket, eyes wide with terror. "Jonah," he gasped. It's inside my head." Jonah clenched his jaw. "Fight it." Malik shuddered violently. "It's so loud." His fingers dug into his scalp, his breathing ragged. "It's showing me things. Things I shouldn't." He froze. Jonah's stomach twisted. "Malik?" Malik's head tilted, and for the briefest second, his lips curled into a smile. Not a smile. A chill ran down Jonah's spine. Then, Malik gasped, his eyes clearing for a fraction of a second. His hands shot out, grabbing Jonah's shirt. "You have to kill me." Jonah's blood turned to ice. Lena let out a strangled breath. "No. We're not doing that." Malik's hands trembled. "You don't understand. If it takes me, it'll know everything. Where we are. Where we're going. Every thought, every plan." He sucked in a ragged breath. "You have to." He seized, his body locking up. A low, unnatural growl rumbled from his throat. Jonah reached for his knife. Lena blocked him. "No," she screamed. "We don't kill our own." Jonah's heart pounded. "Lena." A piercing shriek erupted through the town. Jonah spun around. Shapes were moving in the distance. Silhouettes, shambling through the bleeding streets. Twisted figures, part human, part hive. And they were coming. Now or never. Cam swore under his breath. "We have to go, now." Malik let out a sharp gasp and collapsed. Jonah caught him, but the moment he touched Malik's skin, the whispers surged. For a fraction of a second, Jonah saw the hive. An endless network of minds, all connected, all writhing together. The commander's presence loomed over them like a dark god, watching, waiting. And Malik was drowning in it. Jonah yanked his hand away. Lena clutched Malik's limp body. "We're not leaving him." Jonah's mind raced. They couldn't save him. But maybe they could buy him time. He turned to Cam. "Get ready to move." Cam nodded, gripping his rifle. Jonah knelt next to Malik, lowering his voice. "You listen to me, and you listen good," he murmured. "You're not dead yet. You fight this thing, you hear me? You fight until the end." Malik's eyes fluttered open. For a brief second, he was himself again. Then, a terrible roar shook the town. Jonah turned. The horde was here. And leading them, the flesh-bound commander. He stood at the edge of the street, his form twisted, his limbs stretching unnaturally. His many eyes gleamed in the dark, fixed on Jonah. He smiled. And then, his voice whispered inside their heads. Nowhere left to run. Jonah's fingers tightened on his rifle. They were out of time. The horde surged forward. the night filled with the sound of wet, slapping flesh and the inhuman whispers of the hive. Twisted figures, part corpse, part something else, crawled and lurched from the bleeding walls of the town. Their mouths moved, but the voices weren't their own. "Give him to us." Jonah's grip on his rifle tightened. Malik lay slumped against Lena, his body twitching, his veins blackening further. His lips trembled, as if he wanted to speak, but the words weren't his anymore. The flesh-bound commander stood at the center of the street, watching. Not moving, just waiting. Jonah understood now. The commander didn't need to kill them. He was letting Malik turn. Because the moment Malik lost himself, the hive would know everything. Lena looked up at Jonah, pleading. "We can't just leave him." Jonah's jaw clenched. "We won't. But if they didn't act now, they'd all die." A desperate gambit. Cam was already moving, grabbing what little ammunition they had left. "We need a way out. A vehicle. A distraction. Something." Jonah scanned the town, there. At the far end of the street, past the shambling horrors, an old fire truck sat rusting against a collapsed wall. If they could reach it. He didn't finish the thought. There wasn't time. Jonah turned to Lena. "You keep Malik awake. No matter what." She nodded, gripping Malik's shirt with trembling fingers. Jonah took a deep breath. Then he fired the first shot. The bullet slammed into the head of the nearest husk, sending it crashing to the ground. And just like that, the silence shattered. The gauntlet. The horde charged. Jonah, Cam, and Lena ran. They weaved through the decaying ruins, past broken buildings that groaned and bled. The whispers grew louder. Jonah fired again, taking down another abomination, but there were too many. The flesh-ridden streets seemed to warp, as if the town itself was trying to trap them. The fire truck was only 30 feet away. Then Jonah heard it. A low chuckle. He turned, heart hammering. The flesh-bound commander hadn't moved. He still stood in the center of the street, smiling. And then Malik screamed. The transformation begins. Lena nearly dropped him. Malik's body seized, convulsing violently. His blackened veins bulged, his breath turning ragged. His fingers dug into his skull as if trying to claw something out. Lena was sobbing. "Malik, hold on, please." Then Malik's head snapped up. And his eyes. They weren't his anymore. Jonah froze. Because Malik wasn't just looking at them. He was looking through them. His lips moved, and in a voice that was his but not his, he whispered. "You never left the outpost. The walls are still around you." Jonah's stomach dropped. The horde wasn't the trap. The town itself was. The awakening. Jonah grabbed Lena's wrist. "Run." Lena stumbled, dragging Malik with her. Cam provided cover fire, his rifle spitting death at the horrors swarming them. They reached the fire truck. Jonah yanked the door open. "Lena, get in." She hesitated, still holding on to Malik. Jonah grabbed her. "He's gone, Lena. We have to." Malik twitched. His fingers stretched unnaturally, bones snapping, skin splitting. He took a staggered breath, then lunged. Jonah reacted on instinct. Bang. The shot echoed through the night. Malik's body jerked. For a moment, the world stood still. Malik stared at Jonah, his expression one of betrayal, pain, relief. Then, he fell. Lena screamed. Jonah caught her as she collapsed, sobbing. But they didn't have time to mourn. The horde closed in. Jonah jumped into the truck's driver's seat, Cam beside him. The engine roared to life. Jonah slammed his foot on the gas. The fire truck lurched forward, plowing through the fleshy creatures in their path. Lena clung to the seat, tears streaking her face. Jonah couldn't look at her. He couldn't look back. The endgame. The fire truck sped through the warped streets, the horde chasing them. But Jonah knew the truth now. The commander wasn't worried. He had already won. Malik had been connected to the hive. Which meant the commander knew exactly where they were going. As if to confirm it, the whispers laughed inside Jonah's head. Run, little mice. Run. The road stretched before them. But Jonah had the sickening feeling. There was no way out. The fire truck tore through the bleeding streets. Jonah's knuckles turned white against the wheel as the warped town twisted around them. Buildings shifted unnaturally, their structures stretching, warping, bending toward them. Lena sat frozen in the passenger seat, Malik's blood still on her hands. Cam reloaded his rifle, breath ragged. This isn't a town anymore. Jonah's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. The horde didn't chase them. They didn't need to. Because the commander was waiting ahead. And Malik's final words echoed in Jonah's skull. You never left the outpost. The walls are still around you. A cage without walls. Jonah pressed the gas harder. The truck's wheels screeched over the cracked pavement. The edge of town was close, so damn close. Then, the road moved. Jonah's heart stopped. The asphalt rippled, like muscle contracting under torn skin. The buildings in front of them melted together, the streets folding inward. The entire town was alive. And it was closing the exits. Lena let out a choked sob. No, we were almost there. Cam cursed under his breath. We're trapped. Jonah refused to believe it. He yanked the wheel left, swerving down a narrow alley. The fire truck slammed through a wall, breaking into what used to be a schoolyard. The metal fence was twisted, the ground pulsing with blackened veins. But up ahead, Jonah saw it. A watchtower. One of the last standing structures that hadn't been consumed. Hope flickered inside him. If we can get to that tower, Jonah said, we might get a signal out. Lena stared at him, hollow-eyed. Who's left to call? Jonah didn't answer. He had to believe there was someone. The final ascent. The truck lurched to a stop at the tower's base. Jonah jumped out first, gun raised. Silence. Nothing moved. For the first time since the nightmare started, the town felt still. Lena climbed out last, eyes flicking back toward the streets. Her hands trembled. Cam took a step forward, then froze. We're not alone. Jonah's stomach tightened. He followed Cam's gaze. And saw the figures at the edge of the schoolyard. Not the husks. People. Or at least, what was left of them. They stood in ragged military gear, their bodies covered in black veins. Their faces, not fully gone, not yet. They had been soldiers. Jonah's breath caught. The last defenders of Outpost Jericho. And they were waiting. One of them, ***, a captain, by the faded insignia on his chest, ***, took a step forward. His lips parted, and in a voice not his own, he spoke. Come now, Jonah. This is where it ends. The commander revealed. Jonah raised his rifle. You're not real. The captain smiled. We are as real as you. Jonah glanced at Lena and Cam. Run. Lena hesitated. Cam didn't. He grabbed her arm and yanked her toward the watchtower. The moment they moved, the soldiers attacked. Jonah fired the first shot. A bullet slammed into the captain's skull. And the man did not fall. He lurched forward, his body twisting as if pulled by unseen strings. His voice, ***, the commander's voice, ***, filled the air. You have run long enough. Jonah ran. The Tower of Lies. Lena and Cam had already started climbing the ladder. Jonah reached the base and pulled himself up, his boots scraping against rusted steel. Below them, the black-veined soldiers stood motionless, staring up, watching. As if they knew there was nowhere left to go. Jonah reached the top. The tower was bare. No radio. No supplies. No weapons. Nothing. Just an endless view of the town, a massive, breathing thing. Lena collapsed against the railing. It was all for nothing. Jonah's hands trembled. No. There had to be something. Then. The whispers turned deafening. Jonah clutched his head. The air around them shifted. And the flesh-bound commander appeared. Not down below. Not among the soldiers. Here. On the tower. Standing right behind them. Nowhere left to hide. Jonah spun, his gun raised. But the commander did not move. He smiled. A grotesque thing, his face shifting, changing. Sometimes human. Sometimes something else. Something vast. Ancient. Endless. Jonah felt the weight of his presence. Tell me, Jonah, the commander said softly. Do you see now? Jonah's pulse hammered. See what? The commander took a step forward. The world around them pulsed. And Jonah understood. This wasn't just a town. This wasn't just an infection. It was a consciousness. The hive wasn't a disease, it was a living, thinking thing. And it had been playing with them all along. Lena whispered, "We never left the outpost." Jonah's hands shook. The commander grinned. And in a voice that was both infinite and final, he spoke. There was never an outpost to leave. The ground beneath them shifted. The sky shattered. And reality broke. The world cracked open. Jonah staggered as the sky above split like shattered glass, revealing something vast, endless, and pulsing beyond reality. The town below twisted, its streets warping into veins of writhing flesh. The buildings collapsed inward, reshaping into grotesque organs of something alive. Lena clutched the railing of the watchtower, eyes wide with horror. Cam was hyperventilating. What the hell is this? Jonah couldn't answer. Because he finally understood. This wasn't a battle. This was a feeding ground. The truth of the hive. The flesh-bound commander stood before them, his body flickering between human and something else. His grin widened. You fought well, he said. But you were never meant to escape. Jonah's grip on his gun tightened. Why? The commander's dark eyes gleamed. Because you were never survivors. Lena's breath hitched. We were sent to investigate the outpost. The commander chuckled. No. You were the experiment. Jonah's stomach twisted. The outpost hadn't fallen. It had never existed at all. They weren't rescuers. They weren't the last survivors of some forgotten battle. They were part of the infection. The cycle repeats. Jonah's hands shook. The memories, the frantic escape, the firefights, the horrors in the streets, they weren't real. They had been placed there. Constructed. Jonah clenched his jaw. If that's true, why tell us now? The commander's smile never wavered. Because it is time for the cycle to begin again. The air rippled. And Jonah felt it. Something inside him unraveling. The transformation. Jonah dropped his gun. His vision blurred. His pulse slowed. A voice whispered inside his head, not the commander's. Something deeper. Something that had been there all along. Lena collapsed, gasping. Jonah, something's inside me. Cam screamed. His hands clawed at his own face as black veins spread across his skin. Jonah's knees buckled. Memories that weren't as flooded his mind. He saw himself in different uniforms, with different weapons, in different versions of this town. Always fighting. Always running. Always losing. And each time, when the end came, he was reborn. Placed back inside the dream. The forsaken outpost. Jonah's vision flickered. The town dissolved into a mass of flesh, bone, and shifting corridors. He looked at Lena. Her eyes were unfocused. Tears streaked her face. "It's not real," she whispered. Jonah grabbed her hand. "Lena. Look at me." Her gaze met his. A flicker of recognition. A flicker of resistance. Jonah turned to Cam, but it was too late. Cam's body twitched. His skin darkened, his features melting into something else. He let out a final guttural sound. Then he was gone. A husk. Another piece of the hive. The final choice. The commander stepped forward. "Give in," he murmured. "Join us. It is all you have ever known." Jonah's fingers curled into a fist. Maybe this was how it always ended. Maybe there was no way out. But he wasn't done fighting. Jonah turned to Lena. "If we're not real," he said, voice shaking, "then neither is this." Lena's breath hitched. An understanding dawned in her eyes. The commander's smile faltered. Jonah clenched his teeth. "This world isn't ours. But if we can reject it." Lena nodded, gripping his hand. They had one final act of defiance. They let go. Breaking the illusion. The moment they rejected the world, it collapsed. The hive screamed. The town shuddered, its flesh-bound walls tearing apart. The sky ripped open, revealing the void beyond. The commander lunged for them, but his form wavered. He was unraveling too. Jonah felt his body falling, dissolving, becoming nothing. And then... rebirth. Jonah's eyes snapped open. He gasped for air. Cold air. No flesh. No whispers. Just silence. His hands trembled. He was somewhere else. Not the town. Not the outpost. Something new. Lena was beside him, breathing hard. Alive. Jonah turned. And saw a military base. Fresh. Untouched. As if nothing had ever happened. As if it was starting again. A new mission. A new town. A new forsaken outpost. Jonah exhaled. He didn't know if they had escaped. Or if they had just begun again. But one thing was certain. The hive was still watching. And it was still hungry. The end.